anything else unless you were a regular. And you were regulated, and that meant the government supplied you with everything. So I think there's quite a bit of history that needs to be studied in the word regular. And
Thank you very much.
Find out what that word meant.
Yeah, a lot of these words, they've morphed into something totally different now. And speaking of the First Amendment, our very own Jim Woods, who has volunteered, thank you, Homer, to mention the First Amendment.
All right. Yeah, the adjective I would use to describe this one is overlooked. Many realize that our nation was born as an effort to seek religious freedom by many people. And what that meant was not to be told by the King of England or by anyone else what religion they would have to practice, but to choose their own religion and seek their own maker accordingly. And the First Amendment is very clear. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, so the king can't force you to follow their religious tenets. But the next clause is highly forgotten, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. I think you'd have to be asleep not to recognize that politically correct government agencies and part of the population is trying to prohibit the free exercise of the Christian religion and in some cases the Jewish religion. Most of us grew up where Christmas was a big thing. You'd have nativity scenes and Santa Claus and all these festive things everywhere, including in schools, in courthouse, and etc. And now, because of the ACLU and other groups, they're trying to root that out and destroy a very vital part of our heritage and our national fabric. So hopefully in the next few years we will have the opportunity to remind them of that second clause, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Nancy, I would continue with this. Maybe we can resume the next time. Okay, cool.
My last chance this year, we got it. We have one more person that's going to wrap this up for us, another volunteer, and he's going to tell you what he is doing to extend education in the Constitution up in the northern part of our county, and that is Mayor Gary Werner. And he will actually be the conclusion for our Constitution for this year.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to start with a couple quick points. Something Homer said really struck the soil with me. It was important, and I want to reiterate it here. I, too, was not a volunteer. She walks over to me this morning and hands me the Constitution. I need 2 minutes on some provision of the Constitution, but I'm happy to do it. Another quick point about the Interstate Commerce Clause. In law school, we studied its development, and there's a case that sticks out, in probably most lawyers' minds, called Wickard v. Filburn, and it was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. It's during the FDR administration, but it's after he had swapped out a couple of the justices. The Wickard stands out because the case involved a wheat grower who had reserved some of his own product for his own consumption on his own farm, and the question was whether his reservation of that wheat for his own consumption on his own farm had an impact on interstate commerce, and the Supreme Court concluded that it did, so that a regulation regulating what he could consume on his own farm was indeed an appropriate exercise of the Interstate Commerce Clause power. It's one of those mind-numbing exercises of judicial activism. In any case, briefly, I'm speaking next week for the Rotary Club up in Brunswick. They do a government day every year, and they invite the student council from the high school over so they can meet all the local officials, or many of them certainly. And I've been given the privilege of speaking to them. My presentation to them is going to be about liberty and about how we safeguard it. The big picture is, what does liberty mean? How is it different from freedom generally? It typically arises from the relationships we have with each other and the way we rely on each other to organize ourselves as societies and civilizations, and how do we go about protecting it. And I'm going to tie back to what I think is really the framers' fundamental insight. And the fundamental insight of the framers, which really drives everything they did, is we are frail as human beings. We are imperfect. We are tempted, we are vulnerable, we are weak, and we are lured away from our better senses by sometimes money, by sometimes power, and by many different things. And a lot of the safeguards that were built into the Constitution were designed to address human weakness. Which brings me to the amendment that I wanted to allude to, and that's the 22nd Amendment. The very first part of which says, no person shall be elected to the office of the President more than twice. That was ratified in February of 1951, again, an outgrowth of FDR's several terms in office. But I've come about on term limits, maybe not at the state level, but certainly at the federal level, and certainly because of how powerful and how broad federal power has become over 200 plus years of our history. What term limits recognize is that the longer you're in, the deeper your connections to the network of influences that can take you away from your original responsibilities for being there. It doesn't happen to everybody who gets into office. Plenty of folks get into office, they stay there for years and years, and they keep their footing. Bill Batchelder comes to mind. I said as much in an endorsement I had written for him for the paper. Here's a guy who's been in office, in Ohio longer than some of us have been alive. But he keeps his footing. He knows who he is. He knows what the job is. He knows what his obligations are to the people, and he doesn't get clouded in his judgment by the things that cloud the judgment of so many. So I think the 22nd Amendment is important because it's a recognition of that fundamental insight. In some instances, the lures of power are so great, the only way to structurally prevent their abuse is to limit the availability of those powers to the folks that are there. And I think that that's an important insight. It's one I'm going to emphasize next week. And I thank Nancy for compelling me to volunteer this morning to point that out to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Gary. We're running a little bit late here, so I'm going to give a very short introduction and editorial comment. It's kind of amazing. A lot of us keep an eye on multiple elections around the country, and it's amazing when you look at 3 or 4 different congressional districts where a businessman is running, that they're all being attacked by the same cookie-cutter mold. Evil, greedy businessman, ship jobs overseas, cheat on tax. I mean, it's just amazing how consistent it is. And the information, voters without information who don't realize that this is going on across the country, wherever a businessman is running, are believing this stuff. It's amazing. So we have one of those, Tom Ganley, an abundantly successful local businessman, local boy made good, who has decided to make the sacrifice, expose himself to what people expose themselves to when they run for office, and try to help us straighten out this country. We all know that we are in bad shape. Our country is headed in the wrong direction, and Tom Ganley is stepped forward to help get our country back on track. Tom, would you come on up and speak to our...
Thank you very much for that rousing welcome. You make me feel at home. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to embark on a very historic election. This election, your great-great-grandchildren are going to read about. And I'd like to share something with you. There was a very famous Republican that really didn't get a lot of credit for being a Republican. He was a general. And at the depth of the Second World War, he had to leave the Philippine Islands by a presidential direction. And as he stood waiting to step onto the boat to leave, he turned and he said, "I shall return." That was General Douglas MacArthur. And the point here being that it took him 4 years to return. We have been we've had a Democratic majority for roughly 4 years. And it's time that we follow the great general and we say we will return. And we are returning, ladies and gentlemen. You have a role to play in this. And it looks like I'm going to need a mechanic to fix my microphone. You have a role to play in this, ladies and gentlemen, a significant role. You've got to help get people out to vote. This is the greatest country in the history of mankind. And we have something that many other countries do not have. And that is the right and the obligation to vote. We, being conservatives, and I am a conservative, and I make no bones about it. I'm a fiscal conservative, and I believe that I can make a difference in Washington, D.C. Ladies and gentlemen, right here in this room are the grassroots of a big tsunami election for conservative-leaning people. You must get out there, you must talk to people. We have a few days left. Ladies and gentlemen, let me frame it this way. This is going to be the Super Bowl of elections, and we're going to win. But the only way that we're going to win is if we all make up our minds to really roll up our sleeves, dig in our heels, and make sure that we send our message to everyone that's out there. This message resonates with folks. We're tired of 10% unemployment. I've been a businessman for 42 and a half years. And I might add a very successful one, contrary to what the attack ads might say. Quite different than that. Only in America, ladies and gentlemen, can someone come from the city of Garfield Heights, where I grew up, and where my wife grew up, start a business with $10,000, April 1st, 1968. That $10,000 included a second mortgage on my home. I was 24 years old, I had children, and my first business, and there's too many young people to remember this, but it's really a lot of fun. My first business was a Rambler store on Lakeshore Boulevard in the city of Euclid. I started that with 12 people and myself. 42 and a half years later, only one of the original 12 ever quit. The rest are all still with me or have passed away. That's the kind of businessman I am, ladies and gentlemen, not what you hear in these attack ads. I'm here to rally the troops today, and you are the troops. You are the frontline troops of our movement. We want to take back our country, but it starts right here in Medina, Ohio, right here in this room. We have to have a firm purpose. I have to inspire you, and I'm trying to get you pumped up, and I want you to be inspired, and I want you to go out and sell our program, ladies and gentlemen. Sell what we're about, because we are right. One look at where we are financially tells you that we are right. I want to share with you a very interesting story that I had with Senator Orrin Hatch. I presume most everyone knows of him. God bless you. I presume everyone knows of him. He's a senator from Utah. And in March, it's a while ago, we had dinner in Southern Ohio. And he posed a question that I'm going to pose to you today. When is the last time that we had a fiscally conservative majority in either the House or the Senate? Who knows the answer to that? Does anyone know the answer to that? We have someone, first time ever.
The last year Dwight Eisenhower was in office, we started to pay off the national debt. I think it was $1,100,000,000 that we took in that exceeded expenditures. He said, now we can begin to pay off our children's debt.
Well, you're close. The answer is we have never had a fiscally conservative majority in either the House or the Senate. We've had conservative majorities, but we have never had a fiscally conservative majority in either the House or the Senate. Do you think maybe that's why we have the financial issues that we have in our country today? Think about that. I think that's the answer. We have, our country has been run for the last 100 years or so by mostly attorneys. And they're very bright about framing the law and verbalizing it. That's why the health care bill was 2,200 pages or something like that. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring to you the new thoughts on how to run our country. Let's elect businessmen that have both the knowledge of how to create a budget and, most importantly, the discipline on how to stay within that budget. I've spent virtually my entire adult life creating jobs, thousands of jobs. I believe I can take that knowledge to Washington. I believe it's time for a tsunami of business people to take control of our country, especially the fiscal side, and show and prove that this country can be run like a business. In a business, the term deficit simply does not exist in your vocabulary. You can't. If you run a deficit in business, you're out of business very quickly. We can take that spirit to Washington, and we can impose that or lead. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been leading people for 42.5 years. I do know how to lead, and I know how to lead with a fiscally sound mind and enthusiasm. And today I want to share a few business axioms with you. Enthusiasm is contagious, and I need for everyone in this room to get enthused, to be very enthusiastic for the next couple weeks. Enthusiasm is contagious. If we can get folks to feel that enthusiasm and to grasp onto it, that's your mission. We have a saying in business also, the proof of ability is results. Believe it or not, I'm the author of that one. Not many, but I'm the author of that one. The proof of ability is results. And we need to hold our federal representatives accountable to that. Everyone talks about how great they are, but in business, excuse me, in business we separate that. And we take the verbalizations out of it, and we say the proof of ability is results. You can get results. Be enthusiastic. Charge out there. Think of it as finally a winning team in Cleveland, Ohio. Maybe the Cavs didn't win and the Indians didn't win and the Browns, but our team, this team, is going to win. I'm going to leave you with an enthusiastic thought. Ladies and gentlemen, we can take back the House. We must take back the House, and by God, we will take back the House and control our country. Thank you very much. Questions? Go back up.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask to Mr. Gannon? I see if your hands up.
Okay, let's start. Someone in the back. Here. You guys better have checklists with you.
A couple weeks ago, we saw a miracle happen down in Chile. The president of that country reached out to the world for help. That world came about, 12 countries helped to rescue 33 men. How do you think you can reach out to all these members that have such a negative, I don't know, just to reach out, to work together? We are not going to do this without working together. And we can't have Democrat, Republican. It's got to be Americans working for the Americans.
Well, and that's certainly very patriotic. My mission, as I see it, ladies and gentlemen, is to go to Washington and teach them business. Teach them business, policies, procedures, and discipline. If I can find one word that best exemplifies what we do not have in Washington, it's discipline. And my thought is to gather together 10 or 12 congressmen and women and say, guys, sit down for an hour. I want to talk to you about business. And we'll start with business 101. You have to take in more than you send out. Boy, isn't that simple? Wow. And we'll go from there. And I'll try to stress to them the need for discipline, fiscal discipline. And then I'll try to meet with another group and teach them how to be businessmen. After 42 and a half years, ladies and gentlemen, I believe I can teach business. I really believe that I can. From very, very humble beginnings, I have achieved great American success, and only in America, and only with that Star-Spangled Banner can we do that. And I don't want you to forget that. When you're out there in the grassroots, remember that glorious and magnificent flag that so many people died so that you and I can say the Pledge of Allegiance today. Let's all wrap ourselves in that flag. Don't be embarrassed. That's the greatest flag in the history of mankind. And let's take that flag for all its meanings, all the wars that it's been through, all the recessions that it's been through, the depression that it's been through. Through all of those, this Star-Spangled Banner has flown above a free country. I think our freedoms are being challenged right now, and I think we need to rally around that flag and be patriotic Americans. We have a great country, and we just need to get it back on track. Will it hurt a little bit? Maybe. We'll try to not make it hurt as bad as it might, but we're going to get back there. And I know how to lead people. Another question. Yes, ma'am.
I'm a little more concerned of the opposite side of the point she spoke about. I don't want to see us backing people to get them to Washington only to become, to back down on their principles. You send somebody to Washington so often, and then they're so concerned about making a consensus, which is all well and good as long as the consensus is not against the conservative principles, and that's more my concern.
You notice what I said when I first walked in? I am a conservative, and I'm proud of it. But that's a great question, and I'm going to answer it in a little different fashion. I've heard this at many meetings where they say, okay, Gadley, when you get to Washington, what do they call it, drinking the Kool-Aid, or you're going to drink the Kool-Aid or the water, and you're going to become just like all the rest that get there. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not, and I can prove it. I think many of you have maybe heard part of my story, but I'm about to tell it to you in the Reader's Digest version. I spent 2 years in a covert mission with the FBI to take down the mafia. At great risk, I wore a bulletproof vest. I wore a wire. I carried a bullet-resistant briefcase. The concept was that I was supposed to hold it in front of my head. Can you see that? I said, wait a minute. Okay, all right, I'll let you know. Ladies and gentlemen, after 2 years of covert activity of allowing the FBI to put hidden cameras in all of my offices, to put hidden microphones in all of my offices, to monitor, or the term is bug, all of my telephones, including my home phones. After 2 years, we were able to indict 2 of the very top mafiosa in Cleveland. But the information over 2 years that I gleaned from those characters led to the total destruction of the mafia in northern Ohio. They like to call themselves the La Cosa Nostra, which means that our thing, their thing. Their thing's terrible. At the end of 2 years, ladies and gentlemen, the FBI clearly had sources inside the mafia, and they determined that in their panic to avoid going to prison, that they put out a contract for $1 million. But the only way that they would pay off on the contract is if my wife, my 4 children, and I were killed, murdered. With that, normally protecting federal witnesses is the province of the U.S. Marshal Service. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, the FBI moved into my home for the next year. They moved in with Uzi machine guns. They moved in with M16s. They moved in with shotguns and sidearms. They followed the school. I have 4 children. They followed the school buses to school, stayed in the parking lot on surveillance to be sure that my children would not be attacked at school, followed the buses home. Inside my house at all times were 2 FBI agents. Outside were 2 FBI agents, plus the surveillance team. They drove my wife to the supermarket, escorted her through, brought her home. And for almost a year,